Welcome in. Friday night book study. Friday night tennis book study. I'm reading from this book right here that I read from before. And if you want this book, I'm not going to give any, I'm just going to read the steps that he has here, 1 through 20, in the developing tennis technique section. And if you want the book, email me and I'll send you a copy. And everyone who has emailed me in the past, I will be sending you a copy of this book for your subscriptions and just viewing the channel, supporting the channel. I appreciate it. There will be no tennis library as of now. So let's get into it. So the title, this is in the short tennis stage. So this could actually be everything that's in that I'm going to read could be played out on a short tennis court, a mini tennis court, and then finally on a full tennis court. Here's number one. From the start, a warm-up before the lesson should be a matter of course. So he lists them out, then he talks about each one. The warm-up should involve 3 parts, beginning with a 3 to 5 minute jog, and then 10 to 20 minutes of stretching, and then finally strength, coordination, and speed areas are dealt with, either in the form of a little game, short sprints, coordination drills, skipping rope, etc. Immediately afterwards, the tennis-specific part of the warm-up should be gone through. So this is interesting here, the warm-up. I've never been a big fan of warming up with kids because it's just not enough time. And what kids do today, they typically jump from sport to sport, so they should be, if they are doing that, they're generally warmed up. But the ones that don't play sports, they don't do that. So unfortunately, they need a little warm up, and that wastes a lot of time in these short training sessions that we have with kids. But I want to get into this second part, the tennis specific part of the warm up. Generally, one can say that, and this is very general, generally, one can say that during the warm up, the ball should be hit very loosely, relaxed, and slowly. Say 5 minutes playing service line to service line, and then finally warming up from the baseline, slowly and relaxed, but above all, hitting deep to the baseline. In this way, from the start, the player gets the optimal rhythm, control, and feeling for the ball. This part is obviously not relevant for beginners who can play from service line to service line. So, what I want to really mention about this part here in the warm up. Notice that the focus of a warm up in tennis is to hit the ball loosely, relaxed, and slowly. And he has this in bold. He uses like bold type in this book, and it really highlights. Like you'll see, it's not by accident. It's really highlighting this stuff because it's important. Hitting loosely, relaxed, and slowly, deep to the baseline. And you can see there's no mention of technique, no mention of how the racket should be set. There is some mention, as I get into, there's some mention of rotation, but the reason why this is important, hitting slowly and relaxed as a focus, because if you have to hit high over the net, you're going to hit high over the net. If you have to lob the ball, you're going to lob the ball. If you're going to any way that you're going to make this happen, that is primary. You have to be you have to hit slowly, you have to hit relaxed, and if you have to hit high, you have to hit high. You might hit short at first. You might hit deep, but slowly and relax, slowly, loosely, and relaxed, and then you're going to maybe try to go deep. Then you might try to hit to the target. With subsequent technical Okay, then it says about 2 to 3 minutes, the hitting speed should be intensified. The same procedure should be followed for all their strokes: volley, smash, and service. Now, you do see the pros do this in their warm up. It's almost exactly what they do. They warm up and then they hit loosely and relaxed. And everyone who watches comments on how great it is and this and that, and yet no one does it. I mean, obviously, really good players do to a certain degree do it, but everyone else doesn't do it, and their excuse is that they're not very good. But the real reason, that's not the real reason. The real reason is that they're not focused on hitting loosely relaxed. Their mind is on everything except what it needs to be on. With subsequent technical training, the part should last a minimum of 8 to 10 minutes. In subsequent tactical or match training, warming up for preparation of the stroke technique should last for at least 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, so then that's point one. We get into point two. Before and or during the lesson, after the breaks, regular short periods of coordination or speed training should be inserted. Right away, we're getting some serious stuff here that is not considered by people as important. They don't even know this stuff. Coordination and speed training must be carried out when the player is fresh. This would be incorrect to begin this at the end of a training session. Kind of exercises last about 5 to 15 minutes. This depends on the number of players and kinds of drills. Of course, coordination and speed training must also be regularly included as autonomous training units. So this is something we see with clinics and with juniors, that it's very easy. I've actually never seen this done, like very not correctly. Well, I've seen it maybe a couple times, but it's rare. And people are under time pressure. That's the case. But say you have 6 players on a court, and you could have 2 players resting, and right after a rest, they go into a coordination or a speed game of some sort. I'm not going to get into what that means. And then you have the other players playing out points or playing out a situation with the coach of some sort. You could even have these racket head speed things that coaches do. You could have one player feeding to another, have him hit his 10 strokes, his 10 shots very fast, or half. You could do swing volleys. He hits 10 swing volleys in another space in the area, and then they switch, and they cooperate this way, and that's their speed session, and then they rotate into the game. This can be done throughout the session. You can do this while you're hitting with your friend. You're playing a match, you're playing a set. You take a little rest, and then all you integrate these drills into your tennis. It's very easy to do. It's not difficult. Point number three. I don't know if I'm going to go through all these. I've already had a couple people bounce in and out of these, and yeah, people just don't. They're never going to read this. They don't want to read. They want to. They want to watch these dumbass videos with all these theatrics. I mean, this you can memorize. You can literally go through this, memorize it. It's done. You don't need to forever and ever search for that thing. It's right here. It's simple. It's well, I'm not gonna go into a rant. Point three. After about 20-30 minutes, regular rest breaks of 3 to 5 minutes should take place. Recovery time is just as important as training time. It is wrong to think that the learning or training effect only occurs during training itself. On the contrary, during training, according to the training objective, different stimuli are set which cause relevant and desired biochemical adaptation processes, etc., etc. Moreover, tennis technique training, which takes particular demands on central nervous system. See, this is like You can go deeper with this when he's talking about this recovery time. We talk about I just did the video on Roger Federer. It was totally not. It's not clickbait. I use Roger Federer's name because he uses the system better than anybody else. Everyone uses it. Everyone on tour to a certain degree is using this system, whether they want to admit it, whether they want to think about it or not. I also did a video on me and my partner, and you could see him using the system, and he has no idea. I can tell you that. He doesn't know the system like I know the system. He just does it from experience. And back to this idea of using Roger Federer, because he is one of the best at doing it, in my opinion, from watching tennis. This idea of recovery time, you don't need to hit 1,000 balls. Maybe during certain periods of technique development, you're going to hit a lot of balls, but it's like the idea of I'm going to do 10 minutes. Let's say you want to get into running or something. I'm going to do 10 minutes of running today, and then tomorrow I'm going to do 12. And then the next day I'm going to do 10. And then the next day I'm going to do 15. And you progressively, and then you might rest for 3 days. You progressively increase the load. And it's the same thing for tennis. And there's a mental load. There's something he mentions here on the effect on the central nervous system. And this goes back to my idea that I've mentioned a lot of not having to work hard. That only the freaks out there can work hard all day, every day. And I call them freaks because they're freaks of nature and not hurt themselves and learn and be effectual. So for example, recovery time. Maybe you come out and you play when you're playing a set, you take your rest periods. That's one example. You take your rest periods when you're doing a practice set. You're switching sides. You sit down. You have a little chat. You're working on technique, which means you're working on target training. That's what that is. Let's say you're playing cross court. You're playing some cross court, and then you go down the line to the corner for a winner. You play that out for 10, 15 minutes, and then you rest, and you either do it again or you change to something else, and you come back to it later. You don't hammer away cross court, down the line, cross court, down the line until you're dead and completely tired. I'm a victim. I mean, I'm a not a victim. I'm an example of this. I still do this. I still do this, to be honest. I'll tell you why I do it. Because the people that I play with, and this is no knock to them, this is just literally everyone. It's not on my level. They're not on my level from a tennis standpoint. And I cater to that for social reasons because it's the right thing to do. But if I was training somebody, like if I was training somebody like my daughter or son or a really good friend who wanted trained and we're actually training on a long-term basis, this is how I would do it. Welcome in. If you have any questions, feel free to ask questions. We're going through the technique development steps in this book. We're on step 4. First over short distances. Coach at the net, player on the service line. Take balls from the basket and hit to each other with rackets. The ball should not be thrown, but hit. This has already been mentioned and explained once. And you see this a lot. This is new. This has been trendy over the last 20 years. Hand feeding. It's totally coach centered, and it's it works. It works for what they're dealing with, but it's completely wrong. Absolutely wrong. And especially for beginners. Especially for beginners. But even for everyone, essentially. You could do this, as I said, if you're doing like racket head speed, which preferably you're going to hit swing volleys anyway off of feed. But if you're doing something like that, you have to. You really don't want to make it a habit. You don't want to. You don't want to. You want to use it as a speed drill, and you don't want the player to get into the groove of hitting like that because it's not real at all. It's the only time it's close to being real is off a dead ball, which you do see a lot of players with the serve. You get a big serve, and then you get a dead ball that just sits there. But even then, you better have a target. Point five, the coach not stay in the center of the court, but in one of the service fields and relatively near the net. He's talking about like really starting off from the beginning. Really, uh, especially for beginners, to start them learning the cross court, learning different angles. He's talking about spatial thinking and spatial watching, three dimensional world that we're playing in. The tennis court has fixed dimensions, which cannot be changed, but from the player's point of view, the perspective of the geometry changes practically with every step. For example, we have completely different spatial dimensions before us if we are standing 3 meters behind the baseline, and yet another if we just stand behind the service line. This is never talked about. I haven't touched this, maybe a little bit, but really not at all. And I really want to do a lot more videos on this, especially as I get more serious learners to view who are interested in this. Think about that fact. The perspective of the geometry of the court changes practically with every step. So if you think of this idea of hitting a forehand to a spot, to a target, and then the next forehand completely different from that, and yet people are hammering away, continuously hammering away about technique and what their arms are doing and all this shit that is completely violates this rule. It shatters this rule. It shatters this uh, this principle, these facts. It just takes it away. Imagine you got this player, this learner. They hit one forehand from this position, then they hit another forehand from this position, and they have to focus on uh, their depth perception, the spatial recognition of the geometry, and the coach is over here talking about backswing and forward swing. And then he talks about how this plays a very important role later in competitive tennis. So why not start them off with this in mind? They're not stupid. Young 7-year-olds can understand this. 8-year-olds can understand this. You think of the full court. I mentioned the mini court, the full court, the 60-foot. They're playing on a full court. They're the variations here for them aren't there, especially if they're being fed balls behind the baseline. The ball describes a ballistic curve, which is of course natural due to gravity and air resistance, but which is subject to physical laws. We must not only accept but learn to estimate. The intended ball speed, the intended length, and angle of the shot are all important in this calculation. Then he gets into, this is a really long, like this point here, I pretty much read them verbatim. Point 5 that we're talking about here is like 3 pages long. It shows this picture. You can see the perspectives, different perspectives. Then we're talking about the contact point. You can see the contact point in line with the target. And then there's another one where it's cross court. Seems simple, but it's important. So it can be stated that for 100 shot directions, 100 different optimal points of contact and body positions are necessary, even if only minimal changes are made. 100 different optimal points of contact. And this is where, like, it's to me, giving a tennis lesson. And like, if I'm giving a tennis lesson, sometimes I give tennis lessons, I wouldn't really talk at all. I wouldn't really say that much. And I look as if I'm not teaching. I've heard that, and it's like, you people have no idea. You have no clue what you're talking about. You could, with some of these coaches, you could do a lesson like this and not say a word, and set it up this way so that the player learns all these different optimal points of contact intuitively, and it would be 100 times better than any tennis lesson, standard tennis lesson out there. And no one would know it because they're not educated, among other things. Especially, it says to some extent, this fact combined with the geometry problem of the court and the ballistic flight of the ball, to some extent provides every player who is starting to play competition tennis with a big problem, especially if he is not made aware of these facts, or more importantly, if he is not coached to think this way from the start. Too many short balls, incorrect positioning at the sidelines. Also, the inability to hit well-angled shots are usually not the result of technical inadequacies, but to ignorance of the different perspectives of geometry of the court mentioned above. Think about how simple this is too. Like when we're talking about technique training, hit the ball straight. Now hit the ball down the line. This is actually another point. I don't know if it's in this list or another list, but a point of things that you would practice. Can you hit the ball straight 10 times in a row? Can you hit the ball cross court 10 times in a row? Can you hit the ball twice cross court and then down the line? And these simple changes of angle that players are learning so much that are very, very important. Tennis, arguably more important than anything else that they're learning. The coach and player always stand in the same place in the middle. The player will only store this position in connection with the stroke. His orientation ability will not be developed in parallel with his technique, nor will the different possibilities of applying it. To make an analogy, someone who learns to drive in a village on empty roads will have big problems with traffic in a big city. Another example, nearly every driver has, to a greater or lesser extent, problems or is at least uncomfortable driving in roadworks on the highway. So some pretty good analogies here with cars and driving. This is why it's advisable that the coach and player's positioning are as realistic as possible right from the start, so that the relevant technique is already embedded in the likely future playing positions. There is not one single reason to play from the center to the center. It is just a 100-year-old habit, or else simply convenient for the coach. So really what we're talking about, like you see pros do this when they warm up, as you said in the beginning, the warm up. But once you get into it, especially for beginners, you really want to change the position of sending and receiving to many different positions, because you don't want to waste time. And every time they change position, they're learning a lot. So in this stage, the predominantly movement-orientated learning and task-orientated learning are combined. So focus again on movement and tasks. Make sure the player is moving, make sure the player has different perspectives, and make sure the player has a task. What he means by that is, as I said, one cross court, one down the line. One cross court to this target, one down the line to this target. Tasks not meaning what is the player doing. Unless the one thing he did mention that the player want the player to do is have some sort of rotation, body rotation, even if it's minimal. And most players do rotate naturally. So for the most part, you think of how simple that is, make sure they have a little bit of body rotation. That's it. From right to left, from left to right. Point number 7. The feeding should initially be relatively regular. The player should move a few steps into hitting the ball, though. So start the feeding regularly, consistently, so they don't have trouble, and then move on to moving them as quickly as possible. I'm just going to go through the steps here a little faster. Player 8, the player should vary the direction in which he hits the ball. So that's what I was saying, hitting cross court down the line. Some kind of variation in the direction or where they're hitting the ball. It could even be like low over the net, high over the net, top spin. Oh, we get it. We'll get into that. The player should not only be given a direction to hit in, but also a target area to hit in. That's why I said cross court to this target, down the line to this target, which should initially be quite large. And in my last video with the Federer video, you see I have the targets there, and they're pretty. It, the the middle target can be shrunk and actually made so those outside targets are a lot bigger. And that's what you want to have for more beginner. The way I was using it was probably more intermediate to advanced, and it can get even more advanced than that. I've actually seen Nadal use that target system where the targets were almost like they were really small, like that, around the outside of the court, and he was trying to hit those targets in a game. Which I wish I had that video. If anyone has it, I would love to see it again. It should be ensured that from the start the whole body is used, slight rotation, in spite of any problems which this may cause. So there again, let them rotate even if they're making mistakes. The individual movement should be short. The space they take up should correspond to the speed of the ball and the desired short hitting length. Typically, yeah, if you saying there, if you shorten the distance, that a lot of like if you're seeing a lot of problems, if you shorten the distance, the problems go away, and then you go from there. It's not keep the distance long and just try to intellectually or tell them how to fix their problem. You shorten the court up, problem solved. The forehands and backhands should be practiced equally. All movements towards the stroke, after the stroke, into the ready position, and the hitting position on the court should correspond exactly to the movements and positions required later during a match. This, I think, is a little bit overdone. This idea of hit, recover, split step. I think, generally in the beginning, what I mean by overdone is it's too specific. Like they'll have the players move out to hit the ball. Let's say they're feeding to them. They'll move out, play their ball, and then they'll come back to the middle, and then they'll be like split. And they'll have to do a little split step. It's so unnatural. It's first of all, it shouldn't be done with a feed to begin with, and then as long as the player is moving in the direction of recovery, that's good enough, especially for beginners. Because again, they have to get used to that movement. It's that idea of a little bit here, and then tomorrow will get better, and tomorrow will get better. And it's not, I'm going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to make you do it. See, unfortunately, when you have most of these players we're talking about are like 1 week. They do these lessons once a week, so they can't really progressively increase the load. But ideally, you're talking about every day. If you do it correctly, each day the player does it, the movement will get better on its own. As long as as long as they're moving out to hit the ball and then moving towards recovery. They don't even need to do a split step. As long as they have that little reaction, eventually it'll turn into a split step when they actually become tennis players. With time, the feeding should be more and more varied, obviously. Balls hit from the player to the coach within his reach should be returned directly by the coach. This idea of feeding more and more varied, you can go extreme with this where you see kids are playing like a crazy game of tennis, the ball's all over the place. I mean, for young kids, it's not a big deal. It's not. It's like again, as long as they're not getting into the habit of that being the only thing, you still want to get both players to a point of consistency where they're working out patterns. It's almost like watching that Emma Raducanu video with her and that other girl playing orange ball, and they're actually playing like. And that's why we're using the orange ball because we're also mimicking real tennis, what they're going to play later on. So I think there is some truth to having a mix to that. So in that case, maybe you're using yellow ball for a 10-year-old once in a while, and then most of the time they're using orange ball. But we throw in the yellow ball once in a while. It's fun. It's chaotic. It's a challenge. Apart from exceptions, even in group lessons, the player should hit a series of strokes and not just one stroke. This is also why we use quick start play and say, because you're getting a chance to hit a series of shots in a rally. Volleys and services should be integrated as soon as possible. Volleys should be practiced. Volleys and serves should be practiced uh, just as much as everything else. In fact, I would start with because volleys is like a continuation from short tennis, like starting at the net and then moving your way back. My personal opinion is that starting with volleys is better than starting off the bounce in learning tennis. With increasing success, the player should move further back down the court until he is standing on the baseline. With time, the so-called one-ball rally should be avoided. More and more often, there should be a direct coach-player rallies. Again, the idea of like a one shot, it's not necessarily bad as long as you're mixing it. He says here with such here the period players are already far away and his potential usually plays from the baseline and is therefore able to play long rallies with the coach or partner. With such playing skills, one ball rallies should be the exception. And the last point, the feeding and also the task solutions by the player should be more and more varied. Task solutions should be more and more varied. The challenges be more and more varied, right? Say a player has mastered hitting a couple balls cross court and then can hit down the line. Well, and to a big target. There needs to be a smaller target. There needs to be an understanding of three targets on that side, not just one. So maybe they can incorporate the drop shot. This means that the exercises and drills should resemble more and more closely the contents of a match. So you're working more to what you want them to do in the match. And that then that it becomes that target area that I show in that Federer video. It starts to look the player starts to view the court that way because that's what you need in a real match to be successful against lots of different players. The player comes now slowly through automatization, the technique implementation training, and he must be prepared for this. The mistake is often made here that the player is under challenged. He is required again and again to repeat what he can already do quite well. And that's the idea of, again, this idea of doing everything, coming out and say the player's been playing for 4 years or 3 years, and you do the whole session on forehand rallies, backhand rallies. When the player can hit two spots with a forehand cross court, one spot in the corner with the backhand, and then play a drop shot. That's more challenging. That's what they should be doing. It's not about building habits. And that is another thing that people do. They talk about game styles. This helps every game style. You might not do it in the match, but it's still helping your coordination. And unless you're planning on being top 100 in the world and making $1 million, I don't really see why you would have a certain game style other than an all-around game style. It just doesn't make any sense. Even if you're trying to be a college player, it just can't hurt you. So the fourth stage, then it gets into the next stage. And leave with a couple points here. One should teach the whole stroke as a unit, with the exception of the service, which I did in one video. I broke down the service in parts. You don't want to do that with the forehand and backhand, which I've been trying to explain with the fact that there's no such thing as a tennis stroke. You don't want to break it down. Initially, with a reduced backswing over a reduced distance with a lighter racket, and then only with increasing success of the pupil should the distance be increased or lengthened and the racket be made heavy or lengthened. All ground strokes should be taught at the same time. So it's not, we're going to do forehands today, and next, that reminds me of like, today's the forehand lesson, and then next week is the backhand lesson. Completely wrong. You're giving them, see, this, no wonder so many people think this. You're giving them the impression that there is such a thing as a forehand stroke. Because if they had this mentality, or they had this practice of all strokes being practiced at the same time, then they would learn how to play in game situations. The strokes should be carried out from the start in their complexity, moving and with slight body rotation. So complexity should be from the start. There should be complexity in the training, as much as the person can handle. Learning, later unlearning is almost never possible. Instead, only an adaptation, correction, or modification is possible, which will always be problematic. This is why it's advisable to do things correctly from the start. There's no rush. You do things correctly from the start. You stay with the smaller court till you master it. You stay with the lighter balls. You stay with the smaller rackets. You stay with the weaker players. Stay with the weaker tournaments, etc. Especially under the age of 16. And for most people, under the age of 18 or 19. And that's it. I'm going to leave it there for now. If anyone's still here watching this, check out that Federer video. What he uses, I forget what it's titled. It's the last video I did. And I don't care what the comments say. Who knows who these kids are making these stupid comments? They don't know what they're talking about. So I would have a good laugh at the comments on my videos and the future videos to come, because I know I do.